LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the November 24th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here. Tonight I've picked out the weekend's 13 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be, from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Impeachment is again the main topic I'm covering, and as you can see, I'm wearing my Impeach Trump t-shirt here. The Impeach Trump t-shirts actually went out to the first dozen fans who requested them. I noticed 7 were delivered in the United States this week because those had tracking numbers. I'm not sure about the wait, was it 7? Yeah. And then there were 3 to Canada, 1 to Norway. Don't know exactly how long those are going to take to arrive. But if you want one of these shirts and you're in the U.S., you can join my become one of my patrons on Patreon at a link down in the video description, or you can become one of my YouTube channel members by clicking that join button down there at the t-shirt level. The level on Patreon is $15. Also a direct PayPal contribution for $15 if you're in the United States. $15 at a link down in the video description. You just have to give me a shipping address and whether you want extra large, large, or medium. The shipping ended up costing like $17 to Canada and $24 to Norway, so I think it's going to have to be $25 for the shirt if you're in Canada and $30 if you are in Europe. But for US people, $15. And now I will move on to the substance of the main topic, which were the House impeachment hearings with witnesses. Gordon Sondland was, of course, the big witness. David Holmes and Gordon Sondland basically directly connected Trump, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, Mike Pence even, to the scheme to pressure Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy to investigate Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden, the Crowdstrike 2016 DNC server conspiracy theory that I'll be talking about a lot more in some of the clips coming up. And this was all while holding up a White House Oval Office meeting, $400 million in military aid against the Russian aggression in the Ukraine. Also, Fiona Hill testified that there was a domestic political errand that diverged from U.S. foreign policy, and that will all be covered after I do my first 2 political comedy clips from Saturday Night Live this week. Both the cold open and weekend update covered the biggest news of the week, the Gordon Sondland testimony with Alec Baldwin as Trump and Will Ferrell, the guest host, as Gordon Sondland, in a cold open that there's a screw up when they have they never actually had a meeting of Sondland and Trump for the cameras, but this is a hypothetical meeting, but you notice there's kind of a screw up right when they meet, and I'll talk about that a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Wait, Mr. President, exactly which part of Sondland's testimony proves your innocence?
It's right here in my notes of super important conversations on the phone I've had. I'll read one, but then I gotta split, okay? This is me and Ambassador Sondland talking. He says to me, "What do you want?" And I answer, 2 large pies, extra cheese, extra sauce. No, wait. That's a different phone call. Oh, here it is. I said to Sondland, "I want nothing, no quid pro quo, bro." See? It's right here in black licorice, case closed, okay? I have to go get on this chopper right now.
Wait, hold on, Mr. President, but that wasn't the only conversation you've had with Ambassador Sondland.
Doesn't matter. I still told him no quid pro quo at least once, so any quid that I get after that, that's on them. So that's how it works, see, okay? It's just like when you meet a girl and you say, if you're a cop, you gotta tell me, okay? Besides, I don't even know this Ambassador Sondland guy. That's fake news.
But he's donated $1 million to your inauguration.
And you appointed him to the EU.
Well, I know him, but I don't know him. I never, met him in person. Look, I'd love to explain, but this battery on this chopper is going to die very, very soon. So. Look, I'm holding everybody up, okay? No. Oh, it's you, Ambassador Sondland. It's you blowing the horn for me?
Mr. Trump, can you at least elaborate on your comments yesterday on Fox and Friends, where you said Adam Schiff was the whistleblower?
No. I never said he was the whistleblower, okay? It's so great to finally meet you for the first time, by the way.
Oh, right. Keep the quid pro quo on the low. Got it.
Yeah, I just was leaving right now.
Hang on, I just want to go on the record and say, you guys need to lay off my boy. Everybody loves his ass.
Thank you.
Ukraine, Russia.
That's enough.
They'll do anything for this man. I know, I ask.
So, I mean, that was kind of funny. Like I said, it seemed like when Will Ferrell first came out as Gordon Sondland, the cheering kind of threw them off and they like lost the script there for a minute. I don't know. You can let me know if you think that's true. But one of the reasons I show that is because I think there are a lot of people who get their news through like the late night shows and the comedy shows and even through Saturday Night Live, and it kind of shows what is seeping its way into the zeitgeist, so to speak, or whatever. And the Gordon Sondland testimony basically saying he did it. That's, of course, he did it is the real title of my video this week. And I think, last week was he got caught. This week he did it. It's just getting, the evidence is piling up, and you'll see that when I get to the news summaries. One thing you notice, the Saturday Night Live there covered the way that Trump was recounting his last conversation with Gordon Sondland, where I want nothing, no quid pro quo. That was only covered in one of the 5 news summaries I'm going to show you, which was one of the more remarkable moments from this week. It's only in the CBS Face the Nation one, which I'll talk about when I get to that. But I also want to show a little more of how Gordon Sondland's testimony was covered on Weekend Update more substantively on Saturday Night Live. That was just more parody. There's actually some information and some jokes in this briefer, like 44-second clip from Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update. Oh, of course, as usual, down in the video description, you can find the whole Weekend Update segment I'm showing, the whole cold open. I'm just taking clips. The Saturday Night Live YouTube channel has basically all the skits from Saturday Night Live last night for free, I guess if you live in the right country anyway. And oh, there's a cat Dash walking in front of I have both Dash and Sandy in here, and I do have Dash and Sandy clips for you at the end, and I'll talk a little bit about the technical problems I had in the last couple weeks and how I found a workaround for them. But that's all at the end, the Dash and Sandy and the technical problems for people who want to hang out till the end for that. Now I want to show the second political comedy clip Gordon Sondland covered on Weekend Update last night over here.
But the big revelation this week was that EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland explicitly tied President Trump, Mike Pompeo, and Mike Pence to the Ukraine scandal. It's especially tough for Pence, whose greatest fear is being tied to something by another man.
I just love how much fun Sondland was having. I mean, look at his face. He's in court for one of the biggest political scandals of all time, and he looks like he just took a Molly suppository. How is he so relaxed in court? Meanwhile, every time a cop asks me my name, I get so nervous I can barely say Kenan Thompson.
And you see from the last frame there that I showed, that they went on to cover the David Holmes testimony, which was in some ways even more devastating than the Gordon Sondland testimony. But I thought the jokes were less and less relevant, and I want to get to the news, though I thought that was kind of a funny joke at the end from Michael J. there, the Kenan Thompson joke. But also it's important that you saw the main point there. I mean, there are 2 main things that came out of Gordon Sondland's testimony, which were there was a quid pro quo, and everybody was in on it. So being surrounded by pets acting in very strange ways. And it's distracting me, but I will get on to the next. I actually am, I almost always start with NBC News Meet the Press News Summary, and they usually have the most extensive, longest one, which they do have the most extensive, longest one, but I actually thought ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos did a news summary where they really put out three important takeaways that we learned this week from the big explosive testimony in the impeachment hearings. They talked about how much what we've learned. I think I have this starts with 2 weeks, 12 witnesses, 30 hours. I think almost everyone said there were 30 hours of testimony. I watched all 30 hours. Somewhere else, CBS News' Face the Nation eventually will say 3,900 pages of transcripts. I can't claim to have read all the transcripts of all the depositions, although I read some of them. But the testimony, I did watch all of it. And so I will use that perspective to say that I think this is the best takeaway. It's a 2-minute news summary from ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. After 2 weeks, 12 witnesses, more than 30 hours of testimony, the public hearings into the impeachment of President Trump appear to be over. So what did we learn? The evidence established a series of facts. That President Trump launched a campaign to convince Ukraine to announce investigations into Joe Biden and the Democrats. That he withheld military aid and a White House meeting during that campaign. And that Trump's key national security players all knew about it. Ambassador Gordon Sondland put it starkly. Everyone was in the loop.
And that includes Secretary Pompeo, right?
Many people.
And, well, Secretary Pompeo?
Yes.
And Acting Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
Yes.
Shadow diplomacy outside normal channels.
He was being involved in a domestic political errand.
And so much still in the shadows. Central figures refusing to testify. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani.
You understood that Mr. Giuliani spoke for the president, correct?
That's correct.
As the hearings came to a close, the partisan divide wide as ever. Republicans firm in defense of Trump.
I've not heard evidence proving the president committed bribery or extortion.
Democrats emphatic. The president deserves impeachment.
In my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law. In the words of my great colleague, we are better than that. Adjourned.
So let's dig into where things stand and what comes next with our panel of impeachment experts. Melissa Murray, professor of constitutional law at New York University. Our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. Barbara Comstock, former Republican member of Congress who served as chief counsel for the House Government Reform Committee during President Clinton's impeachment. And Kate Shaw, who served as legal counsel in the Obama White House, now professor of constitutional law at Cardozo Law School. Welcome to all of you. And Dan, let me begin with you.
I wanted to show that not just because about 5 or 10 seconds from the end there, it sounded like someone dropped some dishes or something in the ABC News studio. Not as bad as what happened when Eric Swalwell was on the Chris Matthews show earlier in the week. But that panel, they had a good discussion. At a link down in the video description, you can watch all of ABC News' This Week, either now if you tell them your cable company, if you have cable, I think, or later, like they show up later if you don't give them your cable company. But one of the reasons I think the panel discussions are important, and sometimes I will show, and also the news summaries are important, is because the newsmaker guests sit and watch that before they're interviewed. And you'll see Amy Klobuchar in a clip I'm going to show a little later talking about impeachment. She refers to the panel discussion, which I'm not going to show you clips of. It was a pretty good discussion. And she refers to it multiple times in her answers to George Stephanopoulos. So that's one reason that's worth watching. Like I said, the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, it's a little more meandering, I guess, has more context, it has a lot more clips, and it's just a lot longer, but I think doesn't give you like the takeaways as succinctly as ABC did. But still a strong news summary. Before I get to that, I was reading through the live comments about like how strong the evidence is. I saw one of my Trumpier viewers post a comment here I wanted to respond to. So, yeah, Middle Brother saying the whole trial is hearsay. Well, first of all, what we saw in the House wasn't a trial. That's just an impeachment inquiry, and what the House is doing is more like making the charge. The trial is in the Senate. You know, if you read your Constitution, I have my ACLU Constitution here as usual, of course, and it's kind of like a grand jury proceeding where the defendant doesn't get to come in and testify unless the prosecutor wants the defendant to testify. The defendant's lawyer doesn't get to make an argument in a grand jury before an indictment. And a lot of hearsay testimony is used in a grand jury indictment. And also, people don't understand that a lot of hearsay is actually admissible in court. Like, if a murderer confesses to the cops, and then the cops go into court and say, the murderer confessed to me, that's hearsay. But it's a hearsay exception. There are actually a couple hearsay exceptions. Well, first of all, anything the accused says is an exception to the hearsay rule in a criminal case. And an admission against interest is a hearsay exception. So that is kind of a simplistic argument. The hearsay argument has a lot of problems with it. And I just wanted to point that out before I get to the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, which, like I said, is more extensive, has a lot more context, I guess, but isn't quite as succinct in giving you the takeaways from the week. And I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good Sunday morning. If this were a courtroom drama, the Democrats would seem to have all the evidence they need. 12 witnesses in 2 weeks painted a picture of a president and his administration allies working behind the scenes against the nation's interest to benefit the president politically. We heard firsthand testimony that President Trump pressured Ukraine's President Zelenskyy on that July 25th phone call to investigate his political enemies. That Ukraine officials began to ask questions about where the aid was as early as that July phone call. That President Trump doesn't give a, quote, blank about Ukraine, only about the investigations. Most important, we heard from an insider who flipped that there was, yes, a quid pro quo, that officials were following President Trump's orders, and that the top echelon of the Trump administration was all in the loop. But this is not a courtroom drama, it's a political one. With few signs, public opinion has changed. Republicans fought back fiercely, arguing the testimony was hearsay or inferred or unreliable, and that the witnesses were more discredited than damning. Democrats now face an uncompromising calendar. Do they keep going and risk accusations that they're more interested in impeachment than in doing the people's business? Or do they rest their case now and risk losing the chance to hear from possible key witnesses like Mike Pompeo, Mick Mulvaney, John Bolton, and even Mike Pence, who might change public opinion? In other words, after all we've absorbed these last 2 weeks, what now?
The president has used his office for his own personal gain.
For 2 weeks, a dozen current and former officials have laid out a clear case, testifying that President Trump used the promise of a White House meeting and a freeze on hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid to pressure Ukraine's new president to announce an investigation into a 2020 opponent, Joe Biden, and Biden's son. Running the shadow foreign policy through the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani.
Mr. Giuliani demanded that Ukraine make a public statement announcing the investigations. Mr. Giuliani was expressing the desires of the President of the United States.
President Trump making that quid pro quo explicit in a July 25th phone call with Ukraine's President Zelenskyy.
I was concerned by the call. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
That same day,
the Ukrainian embassy staff asked what is going on with Ukrainian security assistance.
A day later, the president was on the phone with U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland.
You heard President Trump ask Ambassador Sondland, is he going to do the investigation?
Yes, sir.
What was Ambassador Sondland's response?
He said, oh, yeah, he's going to do it. He'll do anything you ask.
He was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, and those two things had just diverged.
Mr. Trump also pressed Zelenskyy to look into a conspiracy theory, shifting blame for 2016 election interference onto Ukraine. A disinformation campaign that Russia has perpetrated for years.
You know, the FBI's never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing. Why did they give it to a Ukrainian company?
Are you sure they gave it to Ukraine?
Well, that's what the word is.
This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves.
Now House Democrats are moving forward on an impeachment report, And the president has been reaching out to Republicans ahead of a Senate trial, hosting lawmakers for lunches at the White House and weekends at Camp David.
Frankly, I want to try.
Just a few weeks ago, Senate Republicans appeared divided about whether to target Hunter Biden.
I've tried to resist turning the Senate into a circus. I don't want to go after Joe and Hunter Biden because people are mad that Trump's not getting a fair deal in the House.
But now they're asking for documents and more.
The vice president's son was serving on a board that was run by the dirtiest guy in the Ukraine.
I am disappointed, and quite frankly, I'm angered by the fact he knows me. He knows my son. He knows there's nothing to this.
And joining me now is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff.
And I will have a couple Adam Schiff clips, because I have his name in the title of the video, so of course there will be some Adam Schiff clips. But one from Meet the Press, and the other one is from CNN State of the Union. And CNN State of the Union is actually the next news summary I want to show you, actually briefer than both the previous ones. Like I said, there was a lot more information in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, going all the way back to the July 25th phone call and the quid pro quo, but like I said, it just didn't give the takeaways from the week as clearly. And I think the State of the Union news summary from Jake Tapper on CNN this morning was even more succinct, maybe too succinct, because it didn't give you all the takeaways you got from ABC, but a lot of the same information, of course. And I will talk about it with you a little more after the State of our Union this week. You know, Jake always says, what is the State of the Union this week? And we're looking forward. I don't know about that, but I'm sorry, looking ahead, because Democrats are moving forward with impeachment, which I don't know. I'm not sure. We can talk about it after we watch that minute 20-second news summary from CNN State of the Union this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is looking ahead. House Democrats appear to be moving forward in their impeachment inquiry after 2 weeks of historic public testimony on Capitol Hill. The clear picture that has emerged: the Trump administration was pushing Ukraine for political investigations while holding up military aid and a White House meeting that Ukraine wanted. A key witness, Ambassador Gordon Sondland, testified that when it came to withholding the White House meeting in exchange for the Biden investigation, quote, everyone was in the loop. It was no secret.
Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
But even after 12 witnesses testified in public for more than 30 hours, the hearings do not seem to have changed the political dynamics in Washington. President Trump continues to insist that he has done nothing wrong, and there are still no Republicans in the House or Senate that we can tell are in favor of impeachment. Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee are expected to spend the next week drafting a report for the House Judiciary Committee, which will then make a determination on articles of impeachment. If the House moves forward, sources say a vote on impeachment could happen before Christmas. Here with me, the man leading the impeachment inquiry, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
And if you watch the beginning of that clip, you saw Adam Schiff was sitting there during that whole news summary, which supports that point I was saying earlier. This is actually a point I make because it increases my the strength of my fair use argument for why I take non-newsmaker clips, because it influences what the newsmakers say. And you saw Adam Schiff sitting there and listening to the news summary before he answers questions later. And like I said, Amy Klobuchar will actually refer to a previous part of the program in the answer I show later. But even though there weren't like the three big takeaways that ABC had, I think Jake Tapper there pretty much said what I said at the beginning of this video. The one sentence, you can say in one sentence what this whole impeachment is about, that the Trump administration held up $400 million of military aid and a White House Oval Office meeting in order to get investigations of Hunter and Joe Biden and the 2016 Crowdstrike conspiracy theory out of the Ukrainians to help Trump personally in his political investigations to help him in the next election. So, I mean, it's not that complex a scandal. It's pretty, and the evidence is getting clearer and clearer. Some of it is hearsay, but some of the hearsay is people directly speaking to Trump, hearing what Trump said. That's still hearsay. If it's someone saying, like David Holmes overheard Trump on a phone call, or Gordon Sondland were telling us what Trump said in his conversations. But if people hear it directly from Trump, that is strong evidence. And then we're also hearing the whole scheme is that, at the May 23rd meeting, Trump told Gordon Sondland and the other people involved in Ukraine policy, talk to Rudy. And then he actually sent Rudy to do the whole domestic political errand that Fiona Hill talked about. And Rudy Giuliani is one of the big missing pieces here. And I mean, it's almost like Trump does all these like wannabe mobster things, and that's kind of the thing that the mobster does, is he never directly in public or to all the soldiers working for him says his, what his big plan is. He uses an intermediary, so the only person who really knows the full scheme is Rudy Giuliani. And well, you'll see some Rudy Giuliani in the Fox News news summary I'm going to show in the clip after next. But this next clip does have Fiona Hill talking about the domestic political errand, which is, I think, after the Gordon Sondland and David Holmes testimony, Fiona Hill was the most important witness this week. And this CBS News Face the Nation news summary, sometimes I say that CBS News's Face the Nation seems like Fox News Light sometimes. It's often pretty skewed towards the Republican viewpoint. This week, this actually is, if Fox News really were fair and balanced, but just more to the right than the rest of the media, I think this is how they would do their news summary, because the next clip I'm going to show is the Fox News news summary, which is ridiculously biased, gives you almost no information about the blockbuster testimony this week. But it's all in this CBS News Face the Nation news summary. They just are very two-sided about it. It's sometimes being two-sided can be a false equivalency. It can, if one side has a whole bunch of facts and the other side has a whole bunch of conspiracy theories, you don't want to give them equal weight. And I think in some ways that's what Margaret, Brennan, and CBS News' Face the Nation are guilty of in the news summary that I will talk about with you after we watch it in the context of the other news summaries. I mean, it's still news, it's still journalism, unlike the Fox News one I'm going to show next. It's just too skewed towards being fair and balanced for the sake of being fair and balanced. I think I've driven that point into the ground, but I'll talk about it again after we watch the clip together over here.
Now to impeachment. After 30 hours of televised testimony and with more than 3,900 pages of depositions released publicly so far, the question resonating through Washington and beyond is what's next in the impeachment proceedings against President Trump? We begin today with a look at what we learned last week. First, the case against Mr. Trump. Republican fundraiser turned ambassador to the European Union Gordon Sondland was the most anticipated witness. He told Congress that the president instructed him to work with Rudy Giuliani to convince Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter.
Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky. Was there a quid pro quo? The answer is yes.
But the president saw this part of Sondland's testimony as vindication.
The quid pro quo you were discussing was over the aid, correct?
No. President Trump, when I asked him the open-ended question, what do you want from Ukraine? His answer was, I want nothing.
And quoted from the hearing to declare the inquiry over.
You have the cameras rolling? I want nothing. That's what I want from Ukraine. That's what I said. I want nothing. I said it twice.
Other witnesses, including former White House Russia expert Fiona Hill, said they were alarmed when they learned of Sondland's efforts.
Because he was being involved in a domestic political errand. And we were being involved in national security foreign policy, And those two things had just diverged. I did say to him, Ambassador Sondland, Gordon, I think this is all going to blow up, and here we are.
State Department aide David Holmes recounted Sondland's phone call with the president in a Ukrainian restaurant.
So you heard President Trump ask Ambassador Sondland, is he going to do the investigation?
Yes, sir.
What was Ambassador Sondland's response?
He said, oh, yeah, he's going to do it. He'll do anything you ask.
Dr. Hill also stressed that the president's continued suggestion that Ukraine, not Russia, was responsible for the 2016 leak of emails that embarrassed the Clinton campaign was dangerously wrong.
This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves.
Is it your understanding then that President Trump disregarded the advice of his senior officials about this theory and instead listened to Rudy Giuliani's views?
That appears to be the case, yes.
Conclusions from each side predictably fell along partisan lines. Republicans said Democrats failed to make a compelling case against the president.
An impeachable offense should be compelling, overwhelmingly clear, and unambiguous. I've not heard evidence proving the president committed bribery or extortion.
Democrats saw it differently.
And in my view, there is nothing more dangerous than an unethical president who believes they are above the law. And I would just say to people watching here at home and around the world, in the words of my great colleague, we are better than that. Adjourned.
And actually, CBS News' Face the Nation had some sort of technical problem there when they came back with the interview of Kellyanne Conway when Margaret Brennan apologized because it went to black for a while. And I think that was supposed to be the intro that Kellyanne Conway watched and then responded to. And I am going to have a clip of Margaret Brennan, I think, doing a better job of cross-examining Kellyanne Conway on the whole 2016 Crowdstrike conspiracy theory than Chris Wallace did cross-examining Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. But, you know, one thing, I think that, you know, I said that the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary gave the best, you know, big three takeaways of this week of impeachment hearings. The CBS News Face the Nation news summary, well, one thing, they didn't put it up front. They actually started with Michael Bloomberg entering the Democratic race as their big story to start the show with, which I didn't quite understand. And I think before I showed the clip, I drove the point into the ground about the like excessive two-sidedness when both sides don't have equally valid points. But one thing I usually watch these clips at least 3 times. Once when I watch the show, once when I'm capturing the clip, and then the third time I watch it with you all as I'm live streaming. And you know, the thing that I've come to believe about that last news summary is, and it's almost like the best storytelling. It kind of told a story, the narrative of the week, even though it gave like both sides excessively of the case. It kind of told a story that was more emotionally gripping, and I don't know, maybe because of the ending there with Adam Schiff getting choked up, quoting John McCain that, you know, we're better than this, or was it? No, it wasn't John McCain. It was Elijah Cummings. Excuse me, John McCain. Elijah Cummings, who recently passed away, and maybe that's why he got choked up there. And he was very unemotional, and I thought Adam Schiff did mostly a good job for what he was trying to achieve, which was maintaining control of Republicans who were, I mean, they staged, you know how I would analogize it to various sports teams where, or sports games, like I've seen this happen in basketball and in soccer, where the players will way overreact to like total non-contact to try to draw the foul or whatever, and that, you know, that whole thing where in the first day of the hearings where they tried to have the first 45 minutes, which is supposed to be either the ranking member, Devin Nunes, or their counsel is allowed to use that 45 minutes, and they tried to yield to Elise Stefanik, the woman, so that she could cross-examine another woman. It was Marie Yovanovitch. That was last week. That was like a whole stunt because they know the rules. They know they're not allowed to do that. And they did that like over and over again. And Devin Nunes, he was the most ridiculous. And you notice none of those people came out on the news shows. Adam Schiff went on multiple news shows. You didn't see Devin Nunes out there. You didn't see Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan was on one show last week. They're not out there defending what happened this week. So I think that's pretty telling as well. But I went off on a big tangent here, and I wanted to actually show you this next and final news summary. And this is total Fox News bias. This is the most ridiculous of the news summaries. You'll see they don't cover any of the explosive facts that you saw covered in all of those last 4 news summaries. There's like a brief summary of, hearings are done, moving on from the Intelligence Committee to the Judiciary Committee. They're writing up their report. And then it's all about the Inspector General's report showing that the oranges, remember how Trump kept saying instead of origins, he'd say oranges, the oranges of the investigation. They're investigating the investigators. I thought it was pretty funny I think it's like a couple years ago when the Mueller investigation, they started with the OJ defense where they attacked the investigators. I never thought I'd see Republicans use the OJ defense, but they're still using it where, they're still investigating the investigators and the oranges of the investigation. And there's this Inspector General report that's coming out that's going to say that some low-level FBI lawyer was dishonest in getting a warrant, which, I used to be a criminal defense attorney. Someone in the prosecutor's office was dishonest in getting a warrant. That happens. That is not a big surprise. And it has nothing to do with it was like he added some extra commentary onto an email and made it look like it was in the original email, or I don't know. I haven't even gone all the way into the depths of those weeds, but that's what's really important on Fox News. And you'll see after we watch this 2.5-minute news summary, first from Chris Wallace and then Kevin Corke, which is ridiculous in terms of compared to all the information you got in the last 4 news summaries. Just ridiculous, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello again from Fox News in Washington. Well, after 30 hours of public hearings, House Democrats are entering what may be the final phase of their impeachment investigation. The House Intel Committee is writing a report to send to the Judiciary Committee, which would write articles of impeachment. A full House vote could come by Christmas. A Senate trial would follow in 2020, a move President Trump says he'd welcome. Meanwhile, we're learning some of the main conclusions of that Inspector General's report on how the FBI conducted its investigation into possible links between the Trump campaign and Russia. In a moment, we'll talk with Republican Senator John Kennedy. But first, let's bring in Kevin Corke with the latest from the White House. Kevin.
Legally justified with no political bias. That's expected to be the findings of a soon-to-be-released Inspector General's report on the FBI's opening of the Trump-Russia probe into the Trump campaign leading up to the 2016 campaign. However, there's also some criticism about surveillance of one-time aide Carter Page leading up to the campaign. However, those familiar with the report's findings also say its author, Michael Horowitz, will cite serious missteps by officials, including the alleged alteration of an email by an FBI lawyer. The report, which purportedly has launched criminal referrals, is expected to be revealed December 9th, then followed 2 days later by Horowitz's testimony on Capitol Hill, where over a 2-week span, a dozen witnesses testified, arming Democrats with material to consider writing articles of impeachment, and Republicans plotting a Senate trial that the president says he wants. This, while one of the key figures at the center of the Ukraine controversy, the president's private attorney Rudy Giuliani, insists he's done nothing wrong.
Are you afraid, Mr. Mayor, that you could be indicted?
You think I'm afraid?
I don't know.
You think I get afraid?
Well,
I did the right thing. I represented my client in a very, very effective way. I was so effective that I've discovered a pattern of corruption that the Washington press has been covering up for 3 or 4 years.
So while the public phase of the impeachment inquiry appears to be over, the House Intelligence Committee could still interview more witnesses in that inquiry. Of course, then that report over to Judiciary, where they will ultimately make the decision whether or not to move forward with articles of impeachment. Chris?
Kevin Corke reporting from the White House. Kevin, thanks. Joining us now, Louisiana Senator John Kennedy.
And I'm going to have 2 of those John Kennedy clips coming up, including one on the Crowdstrike conspiracy theory that's kind of ridiculous. But the one thing I forgot to say about that Kevin Corke news summary before I showed it that I meant to tell you about, but I guess I usually pre-explain the clips too much as it is, and it's the double however. That was one of the things I really liked about, or that I thought was especially evocative of the Fox News ethos to protect Trump at all costs. Well, not at all costs, but at most costs, I guess. Not at all costs, just at most costs, and it being basically a Republican news organ like that. If you look over, no, wrong side. If you look over here, the book, The Loudest Voice in the Room, that's Gabriel Sherman's book about how Roger Ailes started Fox News. And one of the reasons that he wanted to start Fox News was so that Watergate could never happen again, because there was no Republican media to support the president when he needed it most. Well, problem solved. There is a Republican media. And, you know, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. You notice the double however, because it just had to do with the transition from the live to the pre-recorded package. That's just like NBC News Meet the Press does a pre-recorded package after the live intro by Chuck Todd. Well, Kevin Corke did that live intro where he said, well, you know, the Inspector General. Did you notice the Inspector General looked a little bit like Jeffrey Epstein? I don't know, maybe that's just me. Well, I also think Anthony Bourdain looked a little like Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't want to get into the whole Jeffrey Epstein memes thing. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section about those controversial statements I just made about Jeffrey Epstein. But the point I was trying to make is that Kevin Corke in his intro he said that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, not Jeffrey Epstein, he came to the conclusion that the oranges of the Russia investigation were legally justified, but that there was this, however, there was this low-level lawyer who may have engaged in misconduct that didn't really affect even the legality of the Carter Page warrant, if you want to know the truth. But you notice in his intro, his live intro, he said, however, and then when he switched over to the pre-recorded package, there was like another however. So speaking of driving points into the ground, that was another point driven into the ground. But now I have a couple Adam Schiff clips, and I want to first show Adam Schiff talking to Chuck Todd about whether there are more leads he needs to follow, and he talks about how the evidence is already overwhelming, but the lack of direct evidence has to do with the people who Trump won't let talk. And anyway, I think I've talked long enough between clips as it is, and I'll talk about the Adam Schiff clip talking to Chuck Todd after we watch that 3 minutes together over here.
The right question. You just got some documents, actually, a FOIA investigation, a FOIA request by an outside group. Ended up getting some documents that raised some more questions, that tie Rudy Giuliani, confirmed some phone calls between Rudy Giuliani and the Secretary of State, confirm, and you'd gotten those articles that Giuliani was spreading around from the State Department's IG. So there's more documents, again, more evidence. Well, I mean, I want to put, you have all these open leads. It just seems odd that you're stopping.
Well, we're not.
I mean, look at all these open leads. You have Bolton, you have the energy deal.
It's important to know we're not stopping. But it's also important to know this, Chuck, and you've acknowledged this, and I find this remarkable. The evidence is already overwhelming, right? The evidence is already overwhelming. The question is,
but you're not in a courtroom. You know that. You have a political bar you have to meet.
That's true. That's true. But the fact that Republicans may be derelict in their responsibility doesn't relieve us of our obligation to do our constitutional duty. And we feel an urgency about that. So even as we compile this report, even as we submit evidence to the Judiciary Committee, we're going to continue with our investigation. But we are not going to let the administration stonewalling us stop us. And if people are acknowledging, and I think they're quite right, that the evidence is overwhelming, then you have to ask, what more would be necessary to show Republicans? Indeed, is there anything that could move Republicans?
Well, let me give you one example. Let me give you one example.
Do their duty.
Let me give you one example because it's one that a lot of Republicans are hanging their hat on. That if there is one piece of evidence you have not been able to surface, it is this idea that the president, when did he order that the aid itself was to be withheld as a quid pro quo? You only have Gordon Sondland saying that it was the meeting. It was the meeting, and he assumed it. You don't have the direct. This is how they're hanging their hat on.
No, I realize that.
You could say it's a thin read, but it is a read.
Chuck, let's look at this. First, they hung their hat on there's no evidence of a quid pro quo. Then there was overwhelming evidence of a quid pro quo. Now some are hanging their hat on, well, what's your evidence that the president withheld the military aid? The President's own chief of staff has admitted they withheld the military aid to get this investigation, this crazy DNC server investigation, which is part of a Russian disinformation campaign. The president's own chief of staff. I mean, they seem to be saying, unless Donald Trump writes out, I bribed Ukraine, the evidence will be insufficient. What every juror is told, and I don't think that the Senate is different than a jury here, at least it shouldn't be, is they don't leave their common sense at the door. There was no plausible explanation but one, and that was the president wanted this leverage to get Ukraine to do his political dirty work.
Do you, are you going to be?
So, Adam Schiff gave that same answer on multiple news shows this morning, and I think it's important to point out that Mick Mulvaney didn't testify, but he did go on live television at a press conference and say that the Ukraine, the $400 million of Ukraine aid was tied to the Crowdstrike conspiracy theory to investigations, and we all know what investigations mean after this week, I guess. And later he said, I didn't mean there was actually a quid pro quo. I didn't say the words quid pro quo, even though I said that it was one of the conditions. And of course, that's what a quid pro quo is. And, Eric Swalwell was on Fox News Sunday, and he was asked the same question, and he almost forgot till the very end to say that Mick Mulvaney had admitted it. And when he finally did say it, Chris Wallace cut him off. And anyway, I didn't even want to take the Eric Swalwell clip from Fox News Sunday. But I do have one more Adam Schiff clip. I thought that was a really good summary of the overwhelming evidence against Trump that came out this week, and the relative weight of the direct and hearsay evidence, so to speak, I guess. But this next clip is Adam Schiff. He already talked to Jake Tapper about the same issue I just showed you. He basically gave that same answer on the direct evidence question and the waiting for more witnesses question. And this also has to do with the waiting for more witnesses question, but has to do with this legal theory that, if you read your Constitution. I have my ACLU pocket Constitution right here. I've been giving, actually, everyone who got a t-shirt, I also sent along one of these Constitutions and one of these hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl stickers. Actually, I give these away at the $5 level, these at the $10 level, and then the Impeach Trump t-shirts at the $15 level for people in the U.S. Have like, oh look, it's an Impeach Trump t-shirt, but I guess I'm a better model than that mock-up, I guess, because I'm actually wearing this. This is a large T-shirt that I have washed once, and it still looks great, feels great. It's I can't guarantee you'll get it by Thanksgiving. At this point, I promised that to everyone who I sent the T-shirts out to this last week, but you can still get it by Christmas if you want to have it, because I guess that's when they're going to be voting on impeachment, is right around Christmas apparently. But I wanted to get to this legal theory that Adam Schiff is talking about in terms of impeachment, where instead of waiting for the Supreme Court to rule, they're going to get John Roberts to rule, because if you look at your Constitution, that's what got me off on my tangent. Once impeachment happens in the House of Representatives, it moves to the Senate for a trial. And who presides over that trial? Well, it's Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, and he could actually make rulings where witnesses are compelled to testify. I think that's kind of ridiculous, and I will discuss with you why I don't think that will actually happen after you watch Adam Schiff answer questions about that from Jake Tapper over here.
Expect in their chief executive.
What about the idea, I've heard this legal theory posited, that if you took Bolton and everybody to court, Mulvaney, et cetera, and the Supreme Court has never really weighed in on whether or not such a thing, they've accommodated here and there, but they've never really made a decision about where executive privilege ends and where it begins when it comes to people in the White House testifying, being forced to testify before Congress. It would go before the Supreme Court. Who knows how they would rule, and that's all of a sudden we're in 2020. But if you do it the way you're doing it, which is, presuming that you impeach the president, the House Democrats vote to impeach the president, it goes to the Senate, Chief Justice John Roberts presides, and he could theoretically compel John Bolton and others to testify. I've heard that as a legal theory as to why you're doing it that way. Is there any merit to that?
Well, I think there's certainly merit to the idea that we may get a quicker ruling from a Chief Justice in a Senate trial, if it ever came to that, than we would get by going months and months on and litigating the matter. There's no guarantee of that, but I think that it's entirely possible. Ultimately, though, one thing is clear. Because we have adduced so much evidence of guilt of this president, so much evidence of serious misconduct, any privilege the president would have would be vitiated by this crime fraud exception. So that will give way. And if it doesn't, to quote my colleague, Chairman Nadler, it will mean that either Justice Roberts or the Supreme Court itself is not really a conservative justice or court, merely a partisan one. And I have to hope that that's not the case for the country's sake.
So John Bolton's lawyer says that Bolton knows about, quote, many relevant meetings and conversations that have not yet been discussed in the testimonies thus far. Do you know what he's talking about? Has your committee been in touch with John Bolton and his lawyer?
We've certainly been in touch with his lawyer. And what we've been informed by his lawyer, because we invited him to come in and he did not choose to come in and testify, notwithstanding the fact that his deputy Fiona Hill and his other deputy, Colonel Vindman, and Tim Morris and others in the National Security Council have shown the courage to come in, is if we subpoena him, they will sue us in court. Mm-hmm. Now, he will have to explain one day, if he maintains that position, why he wanted to wait to put it in a book instead of tell the American people what he knew when it really mattered to the country.
Although it sounds like you're saying that there is the possibility that he could be compelled to testify in the Senate, theoretically.
Well, he could.
Would you be a House impeachment manager?
The thing is, Jake, that doesn't relieve him of the obligation right now to show the courage that Dr. Hill did. Mm-hmm. She was told not to come in. She was told that if she came in and testified, it could contravene this privilege or that privilege. She made the decision this is the right thing to do. John Bolton should make the same decision.
So, as you know, if the president, if there is a trial in the Senate, the president will be allowed to.
So, I agree with almost everything Adam Schiff said in that last clip. All about whether John Bolton should come and testify in that last part, and various other things he said. One thing that I don't think is correct is that that this legal theory that Chief Justice John Roberts is going to come in and make rulings like, forcing witnesses to come in who wouldn't come in and testify to the House. I mean, he might vote that way on the Supreme Court, and some of these cases, like the John Bolton thing, might be resolved next month in the Supreme Court, and maybe John Roberts will be on that side. But when he's presiding over the impeachment trial or the removal trial after the House impeaches Trump, assuming the House impeaches Trump, I don't think he's going to make a ruling that takes a side one way or the other. He's going to leave that up to the Senate to make all those big decisions, and he will make like more minor decisions like William Rehnquist did. That was actually discussed pretty heavily in the ABC News this week with George Stephanopoulos panel discussion. I think Dan Abrams talked about that. He's the ABC News legal analyst. I didn't show any clips from that, but the next clip I'm going to show is Amy Klobuchar, where she refers to that panel discussion a couple times, including something Dan Abrams, the legal analyst, said, in addition to saying that he didn't think that Chief Justice John Roberts would do anything at all partisan. He'd follow. I think it was Dan Abrams who talked about how William Rehnquist, the Chief Justice during the Clinton impeachment hearings, bragged that he did very little and he did it very well, or something like that was his quote. And that's probably what John Roberts will try to do, is like not do anything, that just let the majority of the Senate decide all the big issues. And and one of the things they were discussing in that panel discussion was whether maybe a few Republican senators would peel off on the evidentiary decisions, like all the Democrats and maybe like 3 or 4 Republicans who are up for election and moderate, like Susan Collins and what's his name? Is it Cory Gardner? Is that the Colorado senator? And some of the other like swing state senators might vote with the Democrats to force witnesses to testify, but Chief Justice John Roberts isn't going to do that. And the other thing Dan Abrams mentioned was something I talked about last week. I talked about how Neil Katyal, this former Solicitor General or Assistant Solicitor General from the Obama administration, who I actually once emailed about his appearance on Colbert like 10 or 12 years ago. So I've actually had some contact with him, and I saw him give this analysis talking about how the founders said that the reason they put impeachment in the Constitution was because they were worried about corruption and bribery, and specifically presidents selling out the national interest to foreign powers and that was something Dan Abrams mentioned that came into Amy Klobuchar's answer, having watched the panel discussion. I promised that she would mention the panel discussion a couple times in her answer, because and this starts with a clip of Mitch McConnell, which Mitch McConnell is one who's really going to be in charge of what happens to the removal proceedings against the president if the House impeaches him, accusing him of impeachable offenses, and then it goes to the Senate for a trial. And here's what Mitch McConnell said about the trial, and then what Amy Klobuchar said in response to George Stephanopoulos' questions, and of course to the panel discussion I just rehashed ad nauseum without showing any clips from it. And I'll talk about it all with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
It's inconceivable to me that there'd be 67 votes to remove the president from office. A number of Democratic senators are running for president. I'm sure they're going to be excited to be here in their chairs, not being able to say anything during the pendency of this trial. So hopefully we'll work our way through it and finish it in not too lengthy a process.
There is Senator Mitch McConnell on a possible Senate trial for the impeachment of President Trump. We're joined now by one of those Democratic senators also running for president. He was talking about right there. Amy Klobuchar joined us from Minnesota this morning. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, George.
So if
that sounded like a little bit of a threat there, I'm sure they want to sit in their chairs and be quiet. Anyway,
so does that make you think that the Republicans will move towards this idea of a long trial for political reasons?
I don't know. The latest word is they wanted a shorter one. I think what's really important to the nation is that we hear the evidence and that it's a fair trial. I will say, when you were talking earlier with the panel, I am just struck by the fact that you go back to the basics, which is the founding fathers, James Madison in that Constitutional Convention, who said that the impeachment article should be included, the provisions in the Constitution, because he feared that an American president could betray the trust of the American people to a foreign power. That's what this really is about, and that's what you heard in the moving testimony of these career diplomats, these career military people who've served under Republican and Democratic presidents who are making it very clear that they thought this was fundamentally wrong.
That was the witness testimony this week. So have you seen enough evidence, even though you're eventually going to have to be a juror if it goes to trial, whether to acquit or convict, have you seen enough evidence to date for this to go to trial?
Yes, I made this very clear that I think this is an impeachable offense. And all of the senators, including our Republican colleagues, are going to have to make this decision. And I thought one of the really good points that was made earlier on your panel was the point that you can't just close your eyes to this. You think about back in Watergate, they didn't close their eyes when a paranoid president who was up for election and looking for dirt on a political opponent got involved in having people break into an office and steal information on their opponents from a filing cabinet. Well, this is the global version of Watergate, where a president is trying to get dirt on a political opponent from a world leader. That is basically what happened here. And so that's the case that we'll be making.
One of the big questions going forward is what witnesses you will hear from.
So I thought that was a pretty good case from Amy Klobuchar. And I think I beat to death the point about the legal panel. But I'm glad to see the idea of what the founders said about they put impeachment into the Constitution because they were worried about a president being corrupted by giving up the national interest to a foreign power. They were, I think last week I said they were worried about France and England, not Ukraine at the time, but it's still the thought that counts. I don't know. And of course, bribery is one of the reasons for impeachment, and there was also a discussion as to whether bribery means what it says in the current federal law. I think it's 18 U.S. Code Section 201 that I talked about a couple weeks ago, where it's an official act if you soliciting a bribe is bribery under the current federal statute, and a soliciting bribe means to ask for a thing of value in exchange for an official act being releasing $400 million of aid, or might even be, the official act might even be an Oval Office meeting with the president. That's an official act, and that was covered in the hearings this week. So there's definitely a bribery charge there, and anyway, I want to now move on to a Republican, or actually 3 Republicans. The last 3 clips are all Republicans. The first 2 are Senator John Kennedy, the Republican from Louisiana, who shares a name with the Democratic President John F. Kennedy. No F, but John Kennedy. I think he used to be a Democrat many years ago. And remember, I showed that Fox News Sunday news summary where there was absolutely no information about all the explosive developments this week, from basically Gordon Sondland saying there was a quid pro quo, and that it was, everybody knew about it, everyone was in the loop. Well, this is the closest Fox News Sunday came to giving that information, and it was Chris Wallace's cross-examination of John Kennedy about what happened, not this week, in the last 2 weeks, and it's very, very brief. As you know, this is more Fox News bias, but this is the most in like the whole show, other than in the panel discussion. There was a little They showed a little bit more of Gordon Sondland, but there's a little Gordon Sondland and a couple other people from the last 2 weeks, and then John Kennedy gets to say, oh, it doesn't mean anything for a really long time, which over 4 minutes, which I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
All right, let's turn to the impeachment hearings, and let's look at some of the highlights over the last 2 weeks. Here they are.
The meeting President Zelensky wanted was conditioned on the investigations of Burisma and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 U.S. elections.
It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent.
Mr. Giuliani's requests were a quid pro quo for arranging a White House visit for President Zelensky.
Now, Senator, you've drawn an interesting distinction. You've said in asking a foreign country to investigate corruption by someone who happens to be a political rival is okay, but asking a foreign government to investigate a political rival is over the line. So what do you see here? Do you see President Trump pushing on investigation or looking for dirt on Joe Biden?
Here's what I see. I think that Speaker Pelosi is acting in a manner that's insincere, even by the standards of Congress. I think she is turning impeachment into a routine political weapon. I think nobody is above the law, but nobody is beneath it. And I find it unconscionable that they have not allowed the president to defend himself on the House side, can't call witnesses, can't offer rebuttal evidence. In terms of the substance, I think the quid pro quo is a red herring. I think there are only two issues in this case. Number one, according to Speaker Pelosi, President Trump asked for the investigation of a political rival. There's another scenario, and that is that President Trump asked for an investigation of possible corruption by someone who happens to be a political rival. The latter would be, if proven, would be in the national interest. The former would be in his parochial personal interest. When I've raised this point of view about the analysis, many of my friends in the media say, well, there's no evidence of any impropriety by Hunter Biden. And my response to that is that the absence of evidence is not necessarily the evidence, or the absence of evidence is not necessarily the evidence of absence if you don't look.
But
and
if I may,
and I was just going to say,
Go ahead, sir.
I was going to say Speaker Pelosi has not allowed the defense to offer rebuttal evidence in terms of the possible corruption that the president was looking into.
Well, obviously, if there's a Senate trial, he'll get the opportunity, not to say, you know, maybe he should before, but I just want to focus on this phone call, because on July 25th, the president is talking to Ukrainian President Zelensky. He doesn't talk about corruption. He doesn't talk about Burisma, for that matter. He just talks about two Americans, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. Doesn't it seem like he was really trying to get dirt on a political rival? And if so, do you think that's a serious act on his part? Is that a crime?
In my opinion, and if I were back teaching in law school, this is the way I would teach this case. Doesn't mean I'm right, but this is the way I see it. There are only two questions that have to be answered here. Why did the president ask for an investigation? And number two, this is inextricably linked to the first question, what did Hunter Biden do for the money? Now, you answer both of those questions, and you can resolve this case fairly. And that's the way I view it. The quid pro quo, I think it's a red herring. Quid pro quo tells you nothing, Chris. What matters is whether it was an illegal quid pro quo, which leads you right into what I think is the correct analysis, which is what I just gave you. Okay. But that's just one person's opinion.
Well, it's one person's opinion who's one of the jurors on if Trump is impeached in the House and it goes over to a trial. And now what he said about the quid pro quo, I actually agree with. One of the things I've said for several weeks is not all quid pro quos are bad, and not all bad things require a quid pro quo. Foreign policy is done with quid pro quos all the time, that, like, our nuclear arms treaties with the former Soviet Union, with the Soviet Union, and now with Russia. It's like, we will lower our arms to this level in exchange for you lowering your nuclear arms to this level, and we'll keep, that's a quid pro quo, but it's not a corrupt quid pro quo. It's not, I will give you the aid that Congress already voted and the Pentagon approved if you investigate my political rival and dig up dirt on this weird 2016 DNC server hacking by Ukrainians through the Crowdstrike company that doesn't even make sense, as I'll talk about later. That is a corrupt quid pro quo. So John Kennedy is correct about that. But the two things we need to know, he said, are one, why was it that Trump wanted to investigate the Bidens? Was that the first one? I guess, did he have corrupt intent? That is kind of a valid point. But the second thing is, what did Hunter Biden do for the money? That is not the right question about Hunter Biden. The correct question about Hunter Biden is, did he do anything illegal? And more importantly, does the U.S. Justice Department have probable cause to open a criminal investigation into Hunter Biden for violating any U.S. law? And if the answer is no, then there shouldn't be any investigation of Hunter Biden. And if the answer is yes, then the U.S. Justice Department, totally divorced from any sort of political interference by the White House, because the Attorney General is supposed to be, the people's lawyer, not the president's lawyer, which William Barr has made a farce of. But then the Justice Department asks the foreign country for help investigating this U.S. citizen that the U.S. Justice Department has determined there is enough evidence to believe that there's probable cause that person committed a crime. That is how Hunter Biden would be investigated through, or if there was going to be a congressional investigation. This all happened when Republicans controlled the Congress. Why didn't they investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden? Because it was stupid. It doesn't even make any sense. Is there nepotism involved? Did he get the job because his father was Joe Biden? He himself said that's probably true, but is it illegal? Should there be some law against that? Well, ask Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. Or I saw this story this week about how Rudy Giuliani's son is the sports liaison at the White House, making like $95,000 a year to coordinate the sports teams that come to the White House. And his job qualification is sometimes he golfs or something like that. But so nepotism is not anything new, but it's unless it's illegal. That was kind of a ridiculous answer. And speaking of ridiculous answers, I've been promising to talk about this Crowdstrike conspiracy theory, and the last two clips I have here are both about the Crowdstrike conspiracy theory. The next one is another John Kennedy interview clip with Chris Wallace, where he sort of, he lightly cross-examines John Kennedy on this, but not as well as Margaret Brennan does with Kellyanne Conway in the final news clip. And I know some people don't like to watch Kellyanne Conway. I apologize for that. It's a 3-minute clip at the end. But first I want to show John Kennedy saying that we don't know who hacked the DNC server. It could have been Russia, could have been the Ukraine, even after, and then Chris Wallace, to his credit, at least says, well, our intel agencies say it was Russia, but he doesn't really contradict what the president, and they show a clip of President Trump talking over on Fox and Friends about the Crowdstrike conspiracy. Crowdstrike is a U.S. company. It's here in California. It does cybersecurity. It's been hired by Republicans. It's owned by a U.S. citizen who used to be, who immigrated from Russia, not by a rich Ukrainian. And Chris Wallace doesn't bring up any of that. All he says is that well, I'll talk about it a little more after we watch that little over 2-minute clip from the final Fox News Sunday clip together over here.
Finally, the president and his supporters have said that Ukraine was behind the hacking of the DNC computers and that it wasn't Russia. That was a big issue this week because former NSC official Fiona Hill said that that is Russian disinformation. She debunked that. But on the other hand, President Trump doubled down on that the very next day. Take a look, sir.
This is a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services themselves.
They gave the server to Crowdstrike or whatever it's called, which is a company owned by a very wealthy Ukrainian. And I still want to see that server. You know, the FBI has never gotten that server. That's a big part of this whole thing.
Senator Kennedy, who do you believe was responsible for hacking the DNC and Clinton campaign computers, their emails? Was it Russia or Ukraine?
I don't know, nor do you, nor do any of us. Ms. Hill
well, I mean, let me just interrupt to say the entire intelligence community says it was Russia.
Right, but it could also be Ukraine. I'm not saying that I know one way or the other. I'm saying that Ms. Hill is entitled to her opinion, but no rebuttal evidence was allowed to be offered. We know, at least the Republicans in the House wanted to call a witness, a DNC political operative, who lobbied the Ukrainian embassy to be involved, get involved in the 2016 election. We don't know if Ukraine did that. We don't know to what extent, because they won't let the president offer his evidence. And that's why I'll say once again, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence if you're not allowed to call your own witnesses.
Senator Kennedy, it's always interesting to talk to you and even more interesting to listen to you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today, and have a good Thanksgiving holiday, sir.
You too, Chris.
Up next, Democrats push their investigation despite the White House blocking key witnesses. Could that backfire, leaving big gaps in their case against President Trump?
Big gaps in their case against President Trump. It was all like that. Fox, even, you know, they say that Fox News Sunday and Chris Wallace is Chris Wallace is a supposedly straight news anchor, but and after Shepard Smith quit, he's like one of the few, bright journalistic spots in the Republican news machine that, no, wrong way. Why do I always get it backwards? If you read The Loudest Voice in the Room over here by Gabriel Sherman, you'll know that Fox News, or my Fox News bias playlist, I spent like the first half of the last 12 years on YouTube compiling over 200 examples of Fox News bias until I thought I had pretty much proven my point. Speaking of beating a point into the ground, but I thought Chris Wallace there, I mean, he did a weak job. He did bring up the intel services, all the intel services say it was Russia, and I know there are people in my comment section all say, oh, there's no, it was someone inside the DNC who put it on a thumb drive. There's this I can't even remember the name of the stupid theory that was later debunked by people who are very credible, and I can't even remember that whole but there's this issue of the Nation where some people who were in on the reanalysis of the hacking theory said, oh, because there's this idea that it was the rate of the time and the rate that the information was removed from the DNC server shows that it was an inside job, but then that was later debunked. And anyway, I'm going off into other conspiracy theories, but the Crowdstrike conspiracy theory was not well debunked by Chris Wallace in that last clip. I think Margaret Brennan did a better job with Kellyanne Conway in terms of the things she said in her cross-examination of Kellyanne Conway, but of course Kellyanne Conway is like a one-woman spin machine, as regular viewers of my Sunday live clip roundup have deduced years ago. Of course, I used to watch Kellyanne Conway back when she was, what was her name? Kellyanne, I can't even remember now her maiden name, but when she used to appear on Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher when it was back on ABC. Well, here she is with Margaret Brennan doing a better job of cross-examining her on all the, Crowdstrike is a California company hired by Republicans for cybersecurity. It's not like some Ukrainian-owned nefarious, hacker of the 2016 elections. But of course, Kellyanne Conway does so much spinning by the end of this clip, you don't even remember that's the question. And Margaret Brennan doesn't seem to even remember that was the question by the end of this final news clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together. Over here.
I want to get to something that we talked about in the top of the show. The president gave an extended interview on Fox on Friday, and he said once again that they, meaning Ukraine, have the server from the Democratic National Committee. Fiona Hill, the Russia expert formerly of the Trump White House, said this is something that's propagated by Russian security services. It's false narrative. 60 Minutes is going to have a report tonight on election hacking in 2016, and Bill Whitaker spoke to the man in charge of the DOJ investigation. Take a listen.
Frankly, I think the public is kind of confused because we hear you, one arm of the government, saying it's the Russians. We hear another part of the government saying maybe the Russians, maybe somebody else, we don't know. So what are we to believe? Is it the Russians, is it not?
Well, our indictment spells out what it is the evidence that we have has shown, which is it was the Russians who were behind the hacking and dumping of the Democratic campaign in 2016.
No doubt.
We could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
Why doesn't the president believe his own Justice Department and intelligence experts?
But the president has said he accepts that, but also there are plenty of ways to interfere in an election. And respectfully, if we're doing this, we're back to Mueller.
About the DNC
but if we're doing
server.
this, we're back to Mueller. And we've already spent 2.5 years and 35 million taxpayer dollars for a Mueller report that was produced in March. It was a big bomb. Mueller testimony in July, a bigger bomb. And if we're going to go back to that, I think it exposes what didn't happen on Capitol Hill this week.
But you know that
high crimes and
Crowdstrike,
misdemeanor.
that firm that the president keeps bringing up, is based here in the United States. It's a publicly traded firm. It's in fact been hired by Republicans since that time.
But here's what I would say, and I'm glad you mentioned this because the July 25th call, Margaret, the transcript of which the whole world has had access to, the president clearly lays out what's on his mind. It's the day after Mueller testifies. Okay. And then the president looks at it, it's his turn. He wants to get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, and certainly to avoid that in the future. Look, we have done a great deal in our White House across our administration to secure our elections in the future. And we agree with that. But I also don't want the impeachment process. I don't want members of the mainstream media, which don't include you, to interfere in the 2020 election the way they tried in the 2016 election. She's going to win. He has 0% chance of winning. That's a different kind of interference, and that's dangerous too. Speaking of the polls very quickly, the independents have totally changed. A month ago, just in late October, they were in favor by 15 points, according to national polls, of impeaching the president. It now has flipped. 49% against 34% for. So these Democrats who are in charge of the hearings don't represent the swing districts. They have to look at the polls and say there's no appetite to impeach and remove this president.
Well, we're going to talk to one of those Democrats who's on the House Intelligence Committee ahead, but we're going to first take a break. Don't go away.
Did I call it by the end of the clip? Like it seemed like Margaret Brennan, well, did she not remember her question, or did she just give up about the whole CrowdStrike conspiracy theory? But there was a lot of spinning going on there. And by the way, thanks here to, I think it was, is it Sean Patterson for reminding me. Wait, I was trying to import that picture and it didn't import. Let me try it one more time here. No. Back on ABC's Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher, she was Kellyanne Fitzpatrick. Now she's Kellyanne Conway. So thanks for reminding me of that. And Of course, I also want to thank my Super Chat contributors so far, at least. So thank you to my live viewers. I did get to do a live stream this week. I promised at the beginning I would talk over what my technical difficulties were and how I overcame them. I use this Wirecast software to live stream every week, and I like 3 or 4 hours before I'm doing my live stream, I post. I create the live stream with the title and the time and the video description. You can see the video description down below the video if you're watching this on YouTube. Somewhere between a little before noon to, I don't know, 10, 11, midnight every Sunday, if I post the live stream and then I start my Wirecast software, I can't get the RTMP details. I can't figure out how to get my Wirecast software. I get this weird error here, and you can see like down at the bottom the RTMP information from one of my old live streams, and I get this error. But it only happens Sunday afternoons and evenings. So to circumvent it, I just posted the live stream earlier, and I started off the Wirecast software and synced it up Sunday morning, and I can live stream. But I still get that error. I don't know what that's all about. So, sorry, I have to do a Marco Rubio here. So I also promised Dash and Sandy clips at the end, and I'm trying to get the Dash and Sandy clips. I'm desperate. How am I going to get them together? There are two places that I can always get Dash and Sandy to interact. One is at Sandy's water bowl, and the other is at the door when they both want to go out. And I'm gonna. For the Dash and Sandy fans, bonus 2 Dash and Sandy clips this week. Actually, Sandy's lying down right over there. Dash had been walking back and forth at the beginning of the show. I don't know where Dash went now, but first here's Dash and Sandy at the water bowl. And that just shows you how nice Sandy the dog is, that Dash feels so comfortable drinking from her water bowl. Pretty bold, but the other place they interact is at the door. That they just wait patiently until I let them out. And here's Dash and Sandy going out the door together. Also, the final clip for tonight over here. And that's the show. I hope you appreciate the 8 to 10 hours I spent today picking out all those clips, figuring out my political commentary and media criticism, and broadcasting the show for you all, just like I have done for the past 343 Sundays. I hope to keep doing it at least until the end of the Trump presidency, which, whatever deity you happen to pray to, willing, will be sometime next year. Well, his presidency, I guess, will end January 2021, at the latest, if we're lucky. And I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future, picking out the best clips from the corporate media, giving my media criticism and political analysis. I appreciate all of you who show up as live viewers to support me along the way, and of course my recorded show viewers and my patrons on Patreon, the people who give me direct contributions through PayPal, and I don't know, so far I don't have any YouTube channel members. Anyone can click on that join button at the bottom and become a YouTube channel. You can be the first. You can be the first. But until next week, or until I have some reason to upload an edited, produced video of some kind, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.